following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for practical advice for everyday problems using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This episode, I'm going to stick my neck out. Like I don't do that every week, but still. I'm going to make some suggestions to improve the mental health care system. I've been having a lot of conversations with people lately about the limits of an overwhelmed system that didn't function terribly well even before COVID. But during and since COVID, the demand for services is completely outweighing supply, so people are just starting to pay attention to the problem. But this is not a new problem. Far from it. Now, I'm sure you will have opinions about this show, so if you want to ask a question, leave a comment, or make a suggestion. Not Therapy Show is where you can go to fill out the contact form, join our mailing list, and see what we've got going on outside of the podcast. Or you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Not Therapy Show. I've been a little better this week. We are tracking my ongoing saga with social media. Yeah. Okay, so one problem at a time, right? NotTherapyShow.com, at NotTherapyShow on Twitter and Instagram. So the first solvable problem in the mental health care system is an acknowledgement that we don't really have a system. Every country's patchwork of services is different. I have clients from all over the world, and I hear the stories, and I learn so much. In the U.S., we sort of know here in Canada what the U.S. is like. It's a free-for-all of for-profit services where you can order pretty much any medication online, find a doctor who will prescribe based on a customer's always right approach, and yet the various levels of government are suddenly extremely interested in legislating care protocols for groups like transgender youth. Now, for me, it's terrifying to consider that a bunch of legislators who are not doctors, they certainly aren't doctors in that specialized field. These not doctors are overriding case history assessed by trained medical professionals because of, I'm going to say it, a moral panic. The U.S. is a system of extremes where you can get top-notch care as long as you can afford it, and a lot of people can't afford it. But the U.S. has also become a place where people with enough money can find a therapist, air quotes, to tell them anything they want. And so some of the richest people are also some of the most maladjusted and stunted people. Just look at figures like Elon Musk and Kanye West. Right. So much money, no one can tell them no. Or no one will tell them no, because if you tell them no, they don't stick around. Meanwhile, in the U.S. poorest neighborhoods, measurements of trauma in teenagers are similar to those found in soldiers in war zones. And what's being done about it? Other than the efforts of a bunch of struggling nonprofits? Not much. At least not much meaningful. Now, jumping over to Europe, there's a definite shortage of therapists trained to deal with trauma. It's not part of the base education for psychologists. It's an add-on that a lot of therapists don't take. Many of the techniques over in Europe are still rooted in Freudian psychodynamics. And those really lag behind best practices over here. Now, there are reasons for this in part. Some of it is just an unwillingness to change, but some of it is that Europe suffered the heavy fighting during World War II, and intergenerational trauma symptoms are widespread. And so trauma centers continue to be developed. They're trying, but a lack of trained personnel is holding back growth. In France, a government-supported trauma care model didn't even exist until 2019. That's right. It didn't exist until just before the COVID pandemic in France. Germany is further along, for, really unfortunate reasons. But there are reports coming out of there of a lack of trained trauma therapists as well, and where they practice is spotty. Eastern Europe, that's still active trauma, right? It's going to take generations to sort out everything that's going on there. And the UK, the UK is so messed up by Brexit and the ensuing, I don't know what you call that over there, but they're in full-blown culture war. And I know that I've left out a lot of European countries, but there are just some that there's not a lot of data, and my Spanish isn't great, so I don't trust what I read. I'll ask some of my bubbleheads that are much better at Spanish than me what those say. Scandinavia seems to be doing better. Wait times are still an issue, but I was in Finland years ago, and there was a suicide section in the bookstore. More on suicide later in the show. No, it does not cause people to become suicidal to talk about suicide. Now let's get to Africa, the continent that people tend to forget talking about this stuff, right? Yeah, Africa. African countries are ahead in some ways. Yeah. African countries are recognizing that medicalization of rational human responses is a problem. They're also diving into what they call culture-bound PTSD syndromes, which is an interesting element. More on that in a bit. I'm still doing our global It's a Small World tour here. It's a small world after. Yeah, sorry. Australia. Australia is very Australian when it comes to mental health, meaning they are not messing around. In 2016, the government of Australia determined that mental illness was costing the country $4,000 per person. Now, the various Australian governments have put in a lot of initiatives since then, but the country still struggles on indexes of mental health. And now we come to Canada. Now, Canada, we pride ourselves, at least most of us pride ourselves, on being a country of immigrants. So the reason I did the global tour, leaving out, the Middle and Far East, because, again, data is spotty. We know where it's bad. We just, we're not going to get mental health statistics out of Yemen right now. So the thing about Canada being a country of immigrants is we catch a little bit of all of this. But we also have our own flavor of dysfunction in mental health as well. The best part of our healthcare system is that everyone can access it. Every citizen, every landed immigrant, everybody with a refugee card, they can access it. Single payer healthcare is no joke amazing. But because we have this great healthcare system, especially compared to other parts of the world, a lot of people get shoved into the system for therapy when what they need is more supportive environments. This is especially notable when children and teens are put into therapy by their parents. Too many parents expect a therapist will fix their kid, but children aren't machines. You have to nurture a child. You don't fix a child. And since lack of nurturing tends to be passed down in families, parents will have to confront their own lack of nurturing to connect with their kid. And, similarly, Canada's willingness to take refugees is wonderful. I'm so proud to be a Canadian because of that. But as a proud Canadian, we've done a lousy job creating environments appropriate for that lived experience. It's like we've lost the sense of what being a refugee means. It means someone who needed refuge from serious ish going down in their countries of origin. Having some lingering scars from that isn't a sickness. It's sanity. Treating reasonable responses to trauma as an illness is just one example of how we've medicalized mental health in Canada. Similarly, deteriorating job conditions, increasing household debt, ballooning inflation, Mother Nature walloping us for abusing her all these years, a virus we didn't know much about, that we didn't have a vaccine against for about 2 years, all this stuff. Times are tough. Being anxious, depressed, and traumatized isn't a mental illness. It's functioning mental awareness that you just need some assistance with. Framing this whole thing in the paradigm of sickness and health is real talk, stupid and counterproductive. It frustrates me no end. You might have noticed. After over a decade in the mental health system myself, I started learning about why my brain was doing what it was doing. And I started working with my brain instead of against it. And what do you know? That worked. I wasn't spending my life running up the down escalator and complaining I was getting nowhere. I was working with my brain. My brain and I are friends now. I love you, brain. It loves me back. Mental illness is real. But a lot of the things we lump into mental illness are things that happen when our brains work just fine. We're just not loving our brain. We're abusing the poor thing. So we're clogging the system with people who would be better served in other ways, and the people with legitimate illness that require medication and other interventions have to wait too long. As you've heard from numerous guests on the show, the people doing God's work with the people out there know these things, but they're working within a system that insists that you label someone with a disease, a disorder, before they can be provided with treatment, which sucks. So let's talk about things in a different way. We're going to do that after the break with my guest. Thrilled to have him, author, speaker, and mental health advocate Mark Henick, coming up after these words from our sponsors. Now, if anything inspires a question, comment, or suggestion, go over to nottherapyshow.com. Check out what we've got there. There's not much yet, but it will grow. You can join our mailing list for future updates on stuff we're doing. And leave a comment, leave a question, get in touch with me, fill out the form. We'll be back after this. Do you beat yourself up? Okay, that's a trick question. We all beat ourselves up sometimes, but a lot of us do it way too often and way too hard. But how do we stop? That's what we'll be exploring as It's Not Therapy presents our Stop Beating Yourself Up webinar. Here's how it's going to work. An opening presentation of the steps and methods that have produced solid results is the first part, followed by breakout sessions to discuss new ways specific to you of approaching motivation and making life changes. So I'd love for you to join us Saturday, April 29th from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Tickets for the session are only $10 and you can bring a friend at no extra charge. Just click the link below and we'll see you Saturday, April 29th, and we'll help you take charge of your life. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. And you know what time it is? It's time once again for the It's Not Therapy interview. I'm super, super excited to talk to Mark Henick this week. Many of you may have seen Mark somewhere out there on the intertubes or various media. He's got a book called So-Called Normal. He's also got a podcast called Modern Minds. And Mark, I'm really happy to be talking to you. Thanks for coming on the program.
Lena, thanks for having me.
Okay, so for people who aren't aware of you, tell people a bit of the story, because we're talking about the problems with the mental health system, air quotes, but give people some background to set the table.
Yeah, I've been a mental health advocate for really my entire adult life and a good chunk of my teenager, young life as well. And it really grew from my own lived experience with major depressive disorder, with social anxiety disorder, and repeated suicide attempts, which I wrote about in my book that you mentioned that came out last year. For me, navigating a system when I was profoundly mentally ill myself as a teenager in a small town, it was worse in so many ways than the symptoms were themselves. That was scary enough, but then to be encountering systems that just consistently made me feel like I was the broken one, not the systems. So really, that's what provoked me to go on and speak openly about my experience, to work as a clinician in the field for a while, and now do the work that I'm doing now, which is promoting resilience and hope and recovery, and showing people that they are in fact better than the system, that they are more resourceful. We are more resourceful than we often think we are. So that's really my mission now.
Yeah, that's one of my big things. I came into this, through my own experiences, and I think we always sort of downplay our own pain with
Mm,
things, but when you hear it from other people, it's like, oh wow, not just me, right?
yeah.
And that thing you said, because it's based on disease, on illness,
Hmm.
instead of, well, people's brains work the way they work, the system is just not working for them. People get really pushed down before they're lifted up. But I'm soapboxing now. What do you think is the biggest issue with, I mean, we're both in North America,
Hmm.
we're both in Canada. What do you think is the biggest issue? And I know it's hard to button one down with the mental health care system.
So I think that the awareness that we've been raising, especially in the last, 10 years or so,
Mhm.
when mental health awareness, particularly in Canada, but really globally, has been so intense over the last 10 years. So many celebrities speaking about it. There's television shows, and we see it in newspapers and on social media all the time, various stories relating to mental health.
Mhm.
But I think a drawback of that is that as things become more and more popular, more and more trendy in some ways, they sort of get simplified and dumbed down a bit. And I think that's what's happened to mental health awareness to a degree, where we hear things like depression is a brain disease because you can see
Mhm.
it in your brain. Well, okay, of course you can see it in your brain. You can see everything in your brain. If you experience anything, of course it has to come from your brain. You are your brain. But that's not a super helpful way of thinking about depression, because it's so much more complex than that.
Mhm.
That we know that yes, of course, your brain influences or dictates in some ways your thinking, but so does your social environment, and so does your upbringing and your history and your interpersonal connection. So it's so much more complex than just you have a brain illness and you need to take this medication and go see a psychiatrist and that'll make you better, because
Mhm.
that's not the way that it works. And why I really try to give people a realistic view of what recovery is like. Recovery is messy and complicated. It's because when we tell people, go and talk to your doctor, get on a medication, it gives them this false hope that then it'll be better. And then when it
Mhm.
doesn't get better, they feel like the failure. They feel like, oh, well, I must be unhelpable. And that's just not true. So I think we need a more nuanced view of what recovery is. And the current mental health system, the current mental health conversation really isn't allowing that kind of complexity and nuance.
Yeah, and we keep talking about, oh, the mental health care system's incredibly overburdened,
Hmm.
and that's very true, but that's because they do medicalize it,
Yeah, and
right?
and that's it. So we're trying to tell people, and look, there's lots of special interests in this space now too. So you're going to hear
Mhm.
all the time, we don't have enough psychiatrists, says the group of psychiatrists, or
Yes.
we don't have enough psychologists, says the group of psychologists. This isn't a coincidence, right? Consider the source. This is basic media
Right.
literacy.
Right.
Those things could be true, and often they are, but it's also part of the problem that we're trying to jam everybody with a mental illness, no matter what it is, and there's more than 300 different mental illnesses. We're trying to jam them all down the same narrow hallway, and then we wonder why wait times are a
Yeah.
year or 18 months. Well, it's because you're telling everybody with every psychic ache and pain that they need to go to the most specialized version of care,
Yeah.
and that's not always necessary.
Yeah, and it is very much, I mean, yes, we love our referrals in Canada because of the way our healthcare system works. And bless our healthcare system, it's great, it's there. It's worse in the US where people have to pay for everything.
Yeah.
But it is, you know, somebody, say, who has suffered a loss, a
Mhm.
parent dies, they lose their job, they're having financial hardship. There's a lot of people having financial hardship right now because of inflation. Feeling bad about that, feeling hopeless about that, that's not a mental illness. That's
Right.
bad times, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like you said, it's go to the doctor, get a pill. Those
Yeah.
pills only stabilize, right? If you don't do the other things, and you're not going to feel, you might feel better, or, I happen to be drug resistant.
Mhm.
So medications gave me all of the side effects and none of the relief. That was really fun.
Yeah.
But there
And
is
actually, that people don't realize how common that is. We tell
25%
people
of
that they
people. Yeah.
exactly. Very relatively few people actually respond to antidepressants. And look, sometimes I have to be careful here because
Mhm.
sometimes when you issue any kind of criticism at all in the mental health space, you get accused of being anti-psychiatry or,
Right.
new agey kind of, and that's not it at all. I eventually did find a medication that worked for me. It took more than a dozen different medications and different
Yeah.
cocktails that did all sorts of, screwed up my body in lots of weird ways. But I
Mhm.
eventually found one that actually did help. And that's part of the problem is that it's like throwing darts at a dartboard. We have
Yeah.
such little specificity in how we treat mental illnesses that's a real problem. And people need to know about the negative effects that those kinds of treatment failures can have on people's minds and their stamina too. You feel like you've tried everything. I hear this all the time. I've tried everything and I can't recover. And then if you actually take just a breath and one step back and ask, what did you try?
Uh-huh.
They'll say, I tried this medication and this medication and this medication and nothing works. No, you tried one thing. You tried medication.
Right.
And
Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
so
Yeah.
many other things out there that you can try.
Yeah. It's like, are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating
Yeah.
properly? Are you exercising? What are your daily stress levels like? Are you in an invalidating environment?
Yeah.
People, I think, because it's medication, and again, I know people who medication was a life changer
Yeah, for
for
sure.
them. It's wonderful we have that tool. But this is where we get into, even when people have tried uh therapy, the psychological talk therapy,
Hmm.
there are a whole bunch of different kinds of it. Certain
That's right.
things work, certain things don't work, but no amount of psychotherapy out there, no amount of counseling is going to help if your environment is what's doing it to you.
Well, this is it. Your psychologist isn't going to make you not poor. It's not going to
Right.
stop your partner from beating you. It's not going to, stop your boss from making you work in a toxic
That's
workplace.
right.
We know that psychotherapy often works better than medication for the garden variety depression
Yeah.
and anxiety, but it won't address those social issues. So we need to really have this at least three root approach where we're tackling the biology, the psychology, as well as the social environment, and indeed the politics of mental illness as well. It has to be that three-legged stool.
Yeah, the politics is a big one because, like you said, certain things have gotten really oversimplified. I had a client a couple weeks ago say this client has OCD. Like, OCD is a tough one, and they don't like it when people use OCD as a shorthand for just being fastidious or
Sure.
picky
Yeah.
about something. And he asked me if I feel similar about people who are like, "Oh, I have PTSD from
Yeah.
this," and it's not. It's they have bad memories.
Yeah. I
I
have a
don't.
similar gripe actually about people talking about triggers and being triggered.
Well, that one
Triggering is
too.
it can be for people who have experienced trauma, an extremely upsetting and traumatic experience to be forced into a circumstance where you need to relive your trauma.
Yeah.
But I also feel like we throw around the word trigger so much now that it's lost all meaning. That it's every uncomfortable feeling.
Right.
That's not what triggering is.
No.
You're supposed to feel bad sometimes when a story is sad or when an environment is difficult. That's okay. That's not the same thing as triggering a traumatic cascade that then makes that person sick. So that's part of I think, where we've lost the nuance, we've lost the sophistication in our conversation about mental health.
Yeah, I call it the will you please go away so I can care about you from a distance phenomenon too, right?
Yeah.
That people, oh yes, mental health is very important. Take care of yourself. Go do some self-care. They're not interested in correcting the problems so that a person can stay in an environment. They just want them to go away so it's not their problem. And they think that's compassion.
Or and I look, I talk about suicide for a living. I've talked
Yeah.
about suicide now for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's interesting now to see the mental health conversations be so popular. And then somebody like me come along and tell some really raw, vulnerable, hard stories.
Yeah.
People cry and they open up about all sorts of stuff when I tell my story because they want to tell their story too.
That's
But
right.
then it's interesting to hear from, event organizers or some other people. It's like, yeah, talk about we need to talk more about mental health and really hard things. Oh, but not like that. Don't do it that way, right? Because they want to talk about it in a way that makes them feel good, and that is about happiness and all that. And that stuff is important. We need to present complex pictures. We need to talk safely about challenging issues, but we also can't shy away from the difficult feelings either.
Yeah, that particular topic is when I used to work in youth music programming, that was one, if there was any suicide at all, you had to put a warning on the video. But, drug use, oh, that was fine. Right. And people being horrible to each other, that was fine. Really toxic romantic relationships, that was fine to show. That particular one, tell me if I'm off here, because I'm just going to take a big swing, tell you my opinion so you can bounce off of it. People just don't want to think about it. They're either not managing as well as they claim and they're trying to not look at it, or they're just, it's not that they actually want to improve things. They just don't want to be responsible for things being bad. And suicide is that one where, oh, there's a contagion effect. Things like that. They just, I don't want to be responsible. I don't want to have to deal with it. Go away, go away, go away.
Yeah.
And
well, people are just uncomfortable with the idea of death, period. But this is where one of those, this is a good example of how I think the mental health conversation maybe has backfired a little bit recently, wherein more people than ever have heard the word suicide contagion. They've heard about that idea of triggering suicidal feelings, but they haven't really gotten deep into the science or the practice of it. We know that talking about suicide is one of the most effective ways to prevent it, because if you mention it and somebody says, oh, I'm thinking about suicide, you didn't cause that person to think about suicide as though they had never thought of it before. You didn't implant the idea in their brain, but you probably pulled off something that gave them permission to say it. I've said this so many times. That's a good thing. That's the point. Just because they didn't tell you doesn't mean they weren't thinking about it before. So I think that we need to do this more. There's definitely productive, safe ways, better ways of talking about suicide than not.
Right.
I did a thing for CNN a couple of years ago when the first season, I think, of 13 Reasons Why came out. And that was a super problematic portrayal of suicide. It was not helpful. But then there were other ways that it's been approached that is much more helpful. We can't be afraid just to say the S word, the suicide word, but we have to be able to present it in a helpful context that shows how people achieve recovery and the journey that goes into it, that it can't just be a one-off thing. It has to be part of a broader narrative.
Yes, serious, important stuff. Mark, as you can tell by that music, we got to go to break. Pause. We'll pick this up afterwards. Mark Henick, everybody, on It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still not finished talking about the issues with our system. Be back after this. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking to author, speaker, and mental health advocate Mark Henick. Before the break, we were talking about why people don't like talking about suicide, and Mark was being way more gracious about it than I was. Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up 13 Reasons Why, because that one sort of exploded things. And that really, and it's interesting to hear you say it was problematic, because I looked at it and went, well, this is somebody, it came across as retaliatory to me. Look how bad you all are. That's not the reality of despair.
No, and that was one of the many problems with it. Of course, they showed there was graphic violence and or graphic portrayal. There was a number of issues with that. And look, I think that there is a lot of value, not only artistically, but also in terms of recovery, of getting into some of the nitty gritty. But again, it has to be presented in a more realistic narrative that isn't sensationalized. It's not overblown. It's not simplified down to this person was bullied and that's why they did it. There's, that might have been a contributing factor. It sometimes is, but it's never the whole story. There's always other competing variables there. So I think that's what I advocate for. It's that we have to be able to present stories of suicide. Period. We have to be able to talk about these stories, but we have to do them in a more interesting and intellectually honest way, and to really reveal the struggle, but also to point towards some of the silver linings and some of the hope. And look, I struggled with suicide for many, many years, and I wouldn't be who I am today if not for who I was then. And I like who I am today. So, that's the other side of the story, that there is another side to the mountain, and that not all emotions are just black and white, that often these emotions get mixed in with each other, and that's okay.
And I don't think we talk enough about control and the feeling of control, and how much suicidal ideation is like, well, this is the one thing I can control in all of this. And there's an odd comfort when nothing else is within your power to do anything about, but you could do this.
Yeah. That was certainly my experience. And that's kind of the key pairing in suicidality is hopelessness and helplessness.
Right.
So hopelessness, you feel like nothing will ever get better. And helplessness, you feel like there's nothing you can do about it. You lose your agency. Yeah. So you feel like you're a prisoner. When those two things, and both of those are lies, by the way, both of those are lies that your brain is telling you.
Yep.
You're convinced that, well, how do you know that nothing will ever get better? You don't know that. And you're convinced there's nothing you can do about it. You're actually a lot more resilient than you think. So those are two cognitive distortions that when we collapse into them, keep us trapped. And that's how we can help people, I think, is to breathe some expansiveness into that collapsed space that those two lies tell them.
Oh man, you just hit so many things and I can't ask you 3 questions at once. So I'm going to try to, man, that was beautiful. Because I mean, one of the things about the hopelessness and helplessness, and then getting interacting with the system, is when you've got people who are very much like, CBT workbook, use the tools. And when it's not working for you, you're not using the tools, you're not submitting to the process. That's hitting that hopelessness and helplessness buttons. It's actually making it worse instead of making it better. And that drives me crazy when licensed practitioners do that. And I understand the reasons. I think we both do. But that use the tools. Well, they're not working for me. You're not doing it properly. That's the worst thing you can say to a person who's struggling that hard because of those cognitive distortions, right?
Yeah. And there's also this effect where, people who have struggled, especially with severe and persistent mental illnesses that, I had treatment resistant depression for a very long time. We have lots of interactions with the system. And every time you encounter one of those people who, some of them, not all of them, some of them like to make sure that you know that they're an expert. Right. They like to be called doctor. They like to make sure that all the degrees are on the wall and all that stuff. That for me, when I meet those people, I think, wow, I just learned a lot about you. And we haven't even said anything yet. But those are the people, I think, who they find safety in a method. They find safety in that. That's what helps them make sense of their world. And that's what helps them to help people. And there's also in psychotherapy, especially, there's a learning curve. You're not going to be good at it right away. You know, sometimes we think you just go and learn your CBT skills and then you're going to be better. Well, that's not how you learn anything. It took you maybe 10 years to get this depressed. You think you're going to unlearn depression overnight? That's not the way that it works. So it does take practice, and there is a certain in psychotherapeutic practice, there's a certain imposter period where you feel like it's not working, or you don't know how to do it, or it's all bullshit and it's not gonna work. But so there is a bit of that you need to work through that. But there's also a piece where you got to trust yourself, and if it's just not right, really listen to that small voice in there that's telling you that, you know, and that's hard to figure out, and it comes with practice, I think.
Yeah, there's a scene in the Disney Plus show She-Hulk where Bruce Banner's talking Jen through the DBT workbook, and he's come out the other side of it, and she's just coming in, and it's the perfect role play. I was on the floor laughing because I'm that out of touch person who's it works, and you know, in 6 to 8 years you'll get it. I don't have 6 to 8. What? Check, please. Right. It was beautiful. I got to laugh with myself there.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I think a lot can be learned from the education space, that we don't bring enough of it into psychotherapy and mental health, where, you know, in order for anybody to learn anything, whether it's a new habit or math or piano or whatever, you got to meet them where they are. And sometimes you might present them with a goal of somewhere to be, but they can't get there because they can't visualize it. It's far from where they currently are. They don't know how to get there. So you got to make the space smaller, make that zone of development a little bit smaller, and take those small steps and grab on to what you can, until eventually, this is what happened with me. I didn't even know I was recovering until 15 years later, when I looked back and realized, holy crap, I haven't tried to kill myself in 15 years. You'd think that's something I would have noticed earlier, but
it's so
you know, it takes
right?
it's so incremental. Exactly. So I think we have to appreciate that that recovery is a learning process, and whatever route to recovery you're taking, whether it's medication or psychotherapy or social supports or whatever, and there's no wrong route to recovery. It's whatever really works for you, I think. We have to honor that, and we have to allow for those spaces in which we feel like we're failing, and where we feel like an idiot that we can't get it like other people seem to get it. That's okay too. That's part of the process.
Yeah, the metaphor, the basic brain science is the same. The metaphors that are going to make it click for people are so individualized, and that's the last thing I want to talk to you about here, because you mentioned those cognitive distortions, and like I said, my brain went 3 different ways. I want to loop back around, because one of those, you know, trendy, you know, mental health TikTok problems is the minute you start talking about cognitive distortions, you get the knee jerk, you're invalidating me.
Right.
And this is keeping people stuck in a very real way. It's a Gordian knot, right? It's so tangled in media depictions and buzzwords and social media, and you know, this one to many stuff. And I say this as somebody who does YouTube mental health content. It's tough because, like you said, it's a very individual approach. Nothing works for everyone. So how do you get over that? Because you're a consultant, right? When someone's like, oh, but talking about cognitive distortions is invalidating language, you're invalidating my lived experience. How do you tackle that? Because that's one of the big stumbling blocks that we can't blame on systems like psychiatric psychologist groups. That's people doing it to other people.
It is, and it's being trapped in your own mind. And look, you can't tell somebody else that their thinking is distorted. As soon as you know that there's a potential cognitive, or you know that there's a potential cognitive distortion at play,
right?
When you suggest it to somebody and they deny it, then because then you're so trapped in your own trip that you can't see it, and you can't see it when you're in it. That's the thing. And look, you know, I've been actively practicing my own recovery for now more than 23 years. Actually, just 2 weeks ago was the 23rd anniversary of my diagnosis of depression. And it's actually probably, thank you. And it was probably a lot longer than that, because I was first diagnosed when I was brought to hospital for being suicidal.
Right.
Suicide doesn't come out of nowhere. I was already depressed before that. So anyway, it's the first, on paper anniversary. But I would say I've learned more about my own recovery and about this piece that we're talking about, what I referred to in my TED talk as cognitive rigidity, or that trappedness in your own thinking. What has been more effective for me than anything else in breaking free of that has been mindfulness meditation and psychedelics. Being able to question my own thinking, my own mind, and realize this trip that I'm on right now, whether it's anger or self-righteousness or stuck on this obsession about this one thing that person said to me 20 years ago that I can't get over, that stuckness is my stuff. And I need to breathe through that, to sit with that, to let myself get out of it. Because when I cling to it, that's what causes the suffering. It's the clinging that causes the suffering. But I'm the only one who can figure that out. So I think for me, those insights have really come from being able to relax my mind enough to let myself let go of my own distortions. And nobody else could do that work for me.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back on to talk about psychedelics, because that's, leaps and bounds in research right now, right? We're just learning exactly how that process works.
Absolutely. We're in a psychedelic renaissance right now. And it's so exciting because while, yes, we're starting to see industry try to figure out ways to commercialize and, patent some of these substances. But at the end of the day, we're seeing long-term enduring recovery from one or two treatments sometimes, which is so exciting for me, that people don't have to live as part of the healthcare system for their entire lives in order to suck money out of them and suck time out of them, that there could be a way to happiness, and it's already inside them. That's the beauty of it, is that we already have everything we need to be happy and healthy and so-called normal, whatever that is.
I don't like normal.
I know. Why be? I forget who. I think it was Carrie Fisher who said, "Why be normal when you could be interesting?" Well, I may have misquoted who actually said that, but I love that quote.
Up. But one of my top 10 phrases is, be the hero of your own story and not anybody else's, and that's my way of looking at that, because I think so often people get, like you said, stuck or trapped in your own trip because they sideline themselves in their own story. It's always about what their parents think, or what their boss thinks, or what their spouse thinks, or somebody, right? Somebody external, and they are marginalizing themselves in their own narrative. And there are reasons for that.
Sure, there are.
People need permission to step into the main character role of their own life.
Yeah.
And people may be listening to this and going, "Oh my God, that what?" Yeah, that really is a big part. You can't live as a tool or an assistance feature for other people and feel like you matter.
Yeah. Well, and it so often comes back to control, I think. We want to control ourselves, but we want to control other people, and we want to control everything, when sometimes, though, ironically, and this comes from dialectical behavior therapy and mindfulness and others, in order to really change, we have to accept, and we have to not necessarily endorse or want to continue the discomfort, of course, but accept that it is what it is, and that's okay. And only when we do that, when we surrender to it, can we really start to let it go and release our grasp. And it's so much freer of a life to be able to just loosen your fist a little bit and let your life flow through you.
Yeah, like I say, healthy goals are based on things you can control. Mark Henick, thanks so much for being on here. Let me pull up your book information again. No memory today. So-called Normal. There's a memoir of family, depression, and resilience, and Modern Minds, the podcast. Mark, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on these other topics. Like that's a fascinating kind of sidebar. And congratulations on your journey. Like, it's really inspiring to talk to people who had a tough battle and came through it.
Well, I have fun, and I think that's the most important thing. Have fun with it, and you'll continue to grow. Every day is a new surprise. So thanks for having me on to talk about it, Leanna.
Mark Henick, so great. So happy to have him on. So happy for his success. I'm happy to have a few more minutes with you when we come back. My final thoughts on some really simple fixes that aren't going to cost a ton of money. Hang on for that on It's Not Therapy. Stay tuned. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We are back in the final minutes of It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. This has been a great show. At least this has been one of the more fun ones for me to do. I like solutions. That's why I give advice. That's why I solve problems. I don't like sitting around moaning about how bad things are. I like to actually make change. And that means becoming comfortable with mistakes, which is why I say top 10 phrase, perfect is a lie. Stop trying to be perfect. You may disagree with me about some of the solutions I'm about to give on how to take some of the pressure off the formal mental health care system and therefore make the mental health care system better. But if you've got an idea, I want to try it. So give me a shout out on nottherapyshow.com. Fill out the contact form at nottherapyshow.com, or you can email me, Leanna at nottherapyshow.com. Sign up for my mailing list. We're working on getting some community initiatives. I'm toying with doing a Discord, oy vey, or Twitter, Instagram, Not Therapy Show. So yeah, the solutions. I've only got 3 minutes left, so here goes. The general theme here is to spend a little bit of money at the beginning so that you spend less money at the end. And that's how you make for a more efficient system that helps the people that need help. So what we want to do is divert the people from the former mental health care system, the people who need medication, the people who need therapy. That's for them. Far more people out there need things like community, mentorship, friends, a feeling of belonging. We need desperately opportunities for people to make friends, but there's no funding for that. Corporations gotta get involved. It's amazing how cheap they are. If you got a business and you want to sponsor something like this, hit me up at nottherapyshow.com, because we're not talking a lot of money to run these things. And I have been doing some test groups online. The results are phenomenal. But in order for them to be positive for people's mental health, they have to be neurodivergent and mental health friendly. And that means training programs that are free for event planners. Everything is simple stuff from don't have really loud music or strong smells or really flashy lights, to things like how to communicate with the neurodivergent, how to bridge that double empathy gap between the neurotypical and the neurodivergent. And trauma is a form of neurodivergency. It's amazing how many things the trauma brain does the same way as the autistic brain or the ADHD brain. One of the things that I have really drilled down on is conflict aversion. People are terrified of conflict because the bottom is going to drop out. So encourage healthy conflict. Get people more comfortable with saying, hey, can you not do that, please? I don't like it. Encourage people to speak up and say when something is making them uncomfortable, and work with everybody to come up with a reasonable compromise so nobody 100% gets their way, because that means somebody else is going to get zero their way. And that's not workable. Really listen. Especially when you don't agree or you don't understand, the words, I don't get it, help me out, are powerful. Because having breaks from the struggle is important for everybody. So having more low-cost fun, I think that's the ticket. And I am out of time. Nottherapyshow.com. Reach out, please. I want to hear from you. Until next time, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. Do you beat yourself up? Okay, that's a trick question. We all beat ourselves up sometimes, but a lot of us do it way too often and way too hard. But how do we stop? That's what we'll be exploring as It's Not Therapy presents our Stop Beating Yourself Up webinar. Here's how it's going to work. An opening presentation of the steps and methods that have produced solid results is the first part, followed by breakout sessions to discuss new ways specific to you of approaching motivation and making life changes. So I'd love for you to join us Saturday, April 29th from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Tickets for the session are only $10 and you can bring a friend at no extra charge. Just click the link below and we'll see you Saturday, April 29th, and we'll help you take charge of your life.